Right, there we are. Right, there we are. Right, there we are. That's fun. Let me get my sound down. Right, there we are. That's fun.
Sorry.
I was doing so good with that.
I know.
Right. I'm going to go and assume this just finishes, huh?
I was doing so good with that.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Weller Bookworks. Just finishes, huh?
Is it mine? I'll mute myself. How about that?
Yeah, try muting yourself. I can't tell where we're getting our feedback. Everybody, welcome to the Weller Bookworks. Just finishes, huh?
Is it mine? I'll mute myself. How about that?
Yeah, try muting yourself. I can't tell where we're getting our feedback. Everybody, welcome to the.
Is it mine? I'll mute myself. How about that?
Yeah, try muting yourself. I can't tell where we're getting our feedback. All right, well, that was an exciting start, wasn't it? Hello, everybody. I'm Catherine Weller from Weller Bookworks in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I am absolutely delighted to welcome you to tonight's Authors in Conversation event featuring Salt Lake City activist Ashley Finley and Mikki Kendall, author of Hood Feminism, Notes from the Women of a Moment. Oh, Lord, people. Hood Feminism, Notes from the Women a Movement Forgot. Before we begin, I have a bit of housekeeping, and I'll try to get this out smoothly because I've been a bit rocky so far. All Weller Bookworks events right now are still in the virtual space. Our next Authors in Conversation event will be Sunday, March 7th at 2 p.m. and will feature Laura Munson, author of the novel Willa's Grove, and Julie Metz, author of Eva and Eve. Our virtual event for crafters with a bookish bent, Lit Knit, is the second and fourth Wednesday of each month from 6 to 7 p.m. More information about these events and others can be found on our website, wellerbookworks.com. Tonight's conversation will be followed by a question and answer period. If you have questions, please type them in the YouTube comments box or post them on the discussions tab of the Facebook events page. I will monitor the box throughout and pose your questions to Ashley and Mikki at the end of their conversation. Also, I hate to be crass, but I'm going to do it. Book events do not fund themselves, even virtual ones, and authors can't eat praise. Just as in the pre-COVID world, bookstores and authors can only bring you books and events if you support them. If you enjoy our conversation tonight, if you're intrigued by its subject, if you're moved to act, and of course, if you can, please buy Mikki Kendall's books, and we would appreciate it if you'd buy them from us. I will put a link to purchase in the YouTube box. Now I'm going to move to the good stuff. Ashley Finley is a California native who is currently living in so-called Salt Lake City. She is a Black woman, a daughter, a sister, an auntie, a friend, a dog mom, a nature lover, a birth keeper, a medicine maker, a poet, an activist, and an educator. She is one of the founders of Black Lives Matter Salt Lake City. Her passion lies in the liberation of all colonized and oppressed people and in the facilitating of a return to sacred ancestral knowledge that bloomed before colonization and capitalism. Mikki Kendall is a New York Times best-selling writer, speaker, and blogger whose work has appeared in the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, the Guardian, Time, Salon, Ebony, Essence, and many other places. She is an accomplished public speaker who has discussed race, feminism, violence in Chicago, tech, pop culture, and social media on Good Morning America, The Daily Show, MSNBC, NPR, including Today, I hear, Al Jazeera's The Listening Post, BBC's Woman's Hour, and HuffPost Live, as well as in universities across the country. In 2017, she was awarded Best Food Essay from the Association of Food Journalists for her essay on hot sauce, Jim Crow, and Beyonce. She is also the author of the amazing book, Amazon's Abolitionists and Activists, A Graphic History of Women's Fight for Their Rights, and a co-editor of the Locus-nominated anthology Hidden Youth, as well as part of the Hugo-nominated team of editors at Fireside Magazine. She is a veteran, and she currently lives in Chicago with her family. Her latest book, Hood Feminism, a favorite of several Weller Bookworks booksellers, was just published in paperback by Penguin. Congratulations, Mikki. And Ashley and Mikki, we are honored to have you both with us tonight. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Catherine, and thank you infinitely to Mikki. I'm so excited to be here with you tonight. When Weller Bookworks reached out to me and asked if this was something that I would be interested in doing, of course, I was just like immediately like, of course, yes, send me the details. I don't even care, because Hood Feminism has been such an important book to me in my growth as an organizer, but also as a critical thinker, right? And also understanding like where my spot is as a Black woman who has a lot of the feelings that you express in the book in this movement. So I just want to thank you so much for your work. I want to thank you so much for your presence, your truth telling. I'm so happy to be here with you tonight.
You're so sweet. Thank you. I really appreciate you giving up a random Thursday night to listen to me.
No, it's like it's enriching. It's not giving up, I promise. But so I know in the book you talk about a lot of your own personal experiences when you have the conversation, like, right, you bring the what is it, the macro to the micro. So if I could ask you, what inspired you to write Hood Feminism?
So the backstory of this is that I didn't want to write this book because I didn't think anyone was going to read it. And I know how that sounds. But for decades, I was one of those Black girls, right? They sometimes call us hot Cheeto girls, or that stuff. Candy in my hot pickles. Usually there are nails, thanks COVID, things like that.
Right.
And often the way that feminism talked about girls from my neighborhood, girls like me in any neighborhood, was a problem to be solved, right? We were a situation that someone needed to address. We were not really people. We were definitely not equals. And so I got into an altercation on the internet with the hashtag Solidarity is for White Women coming out of that altercation. And I originally resisted the idea that I should write a book, even though I was watching a lot of my words end up on BuzzFeed articles and other places. I was like, oh yeah, sure, but nobody's going to want to read a book full of this. And then the same conversations kept happening, and kind of the final straw was yet another one of those books came out, and I'm not naming names. I'm just going to say that there was a chapter in the book I was asked to review that lacked all compassion or even consideration for a girl like me. And it was written by someone who should have known better, who could have done better, but they didn't. And maybe, even if nobody wants to read, I need to get this off my chest. Well, turns out I was wrong, obviously. There were people who definitely wanted to read this book. And the motivation throughout was to shift the way we talk about these things, because I not knocking the girl boss version of feminism. Okay, I'm a little bit. But it sure seems like we were so focused on going up, we weren't even looking around, much less metaphorically down at people who had less. It's a lot easier to become, a CEO of your own LLC or whatever if you have the money and the education in business and in the processes in the first place than it is if you are just trying to make sure that everybody has a place to stay that night and everybody is eating.
Right. Right. Oh, I love that. I love the story that you just told us, or the experience rather that you just told us. And it reminds me of the quote, right? If there is a book that you want to read that has not been written yet, then you must write the book, right? So you did. And you're right. So many people want to read, have wanted to read this book and want to read this book, because just when I posted about this event, people here in Salt Lake City were, honestly, it's hard to imagine that, people in Salt Lake City are picking up a book called Hood Feminism, right? But so many people are like, yeah, I read that book, love that book. That book did so much for me. It helped grow me in so many ways. And so, yeah, you're right. There's a certain type of woman specifically, right? Black woman that has been overlooked. And so I think it's beautiful that you bring them to light in this way, right? So I know you kind of gave us the inspiration, your personal story behind the book. But so when my friend saw the book on my coffee table, he goes like, Hood Feminism, like the hood. And this is someone from your neck of the woods, the south side of Chicago, right? South side of Chicago, because and he was kind of confused, like those two words, I don't really hear them together a lot. So for him and others watching who might have that same kind of idea, what is hood feminism?
So hood feminism is that day-to-day live feminism. And if you are from the south side of Chicago, the west side, the barrio, the Reds, whatever, you have, someone like the candy lady who always, even for the kids who didn't have enough money, would always find a way to make sure you ate that day.
Yes.
The teachers who stayed on your back, right? Not the ones who put you down or tried to tear you apart, but the ones that were like, you can do it, you can make it. Come on, we're in this together. I will help you, right?
Right.
This is one of my experiences of being in the hood. It's the way that your neighbors know everything about all of the kids in the neighborhood, right? And it can feel invasive at times, don't get me wrong, but you are always walking through people who don't have enough, but who are working together as best as they can, as hard as they can, to make sure their kids have more than they have, to make sure all the kids that they can get to that next step, right? And I know people tend to think of it as being saved from the hood, but I tend to think of it as being saved and protected by the hood. Because once I left the South Side, once I started to go into places that were primarily white institutions, I found out very quickly that bias doesn't stop at the schoolhouse door. Right. Bias will walk right in and sit down in the desk next to you or in front of you, and it will filter out all manner of things, including how you were treated while you were trying to get that education. And some people will think of, well, this is why you go to an HBCU and not a PWI. Right. I'm going to say, though, that especially as teaching has changed, that can start at your high school. That can start at your middle school. Sometimes it just starts at school.
At school, right.
Right. And so that's the thing. Hood feminism is those women in low-income communities. And I tend to focus on Black women because I am a Black woman, but you always have, Black and Indigenous, other POC, and sometimes low-income white women who are in the hood. And this is not a only cis women thing either. You got trans folks in the hood, you got non-binary folks in the hood, right? Poverty is a unifying force, shall we say.
Yes.
And part of being part of that community is showing up for the community every day in some very small ways. And hood feminism can be as mundane as, girl, here, I got some extra rice, cereal, right? Helping each other get through that month.
Yeah.
Helping with tutoring or hand-me-downs. And we don't tend to think of the women who do all of that work, who go outside to break up the fights and all of these things, as doing feminist work. But what could be more feminist than making sure it's safe for the kids to go to school, than showing up to argue to keep the school nurse, to make sure that whatever is going on the corner, sometimes you're the person that's out there making sure everybody ate and did their homework because there's nobody else to do it that day. And you know these kids, even if people outside the community think of them as bad kids, you know that they were kids and life has dealt them a hand and they're making choices based off what's in front of them, even if those aren't the greatest choices, because they have no good choices.
Ooh, yes, a word. A word in so many words, because you're exactly right. This is what in my personal life, I call it kind of like the village, right? Like the village mentality. And I was talking to someone about this very specific thing that you're talking about, like growing up in, again, I am a Black woman, right? So this is like the worldview that I have, right? But growing up in a tradition that literally says, okay, well, she ain't got it, but I got it. And if I ain't got it, then I know she over there got it. And we're going to put every little bit that we have together to make sure that we're going to make it, right? Like we're going to make it till tomorrow or next month or the first or whatever it is. And that our babies are going to as well, right? Because right, like that whole saying, like we all we got, right, is like the mentality I really did grow up with. And I saw it acted out every single day in my own life, especially what you're talking about, like the whole community knowing who you are and somehow them knowing that you was talking too much in school today before you even walk out of the school door.
And this is the thing, I think people who don't grow up that way don't understand. It doesn't even stop as a kid. When you're the one in high school and everybody's pushing you to go to college, they know.
Yeah.
To give you an example of this, and so in my community, it's normal for you to stay home for 6 weeks after birth, right? You're supposed to have whoever help. I had my oldest and I wanted ice cream and there was no one around and I thought I could run to the grocery store real quick. I had been in the house for almost 4 weeks, so this would be great.
Right.
The cashier at the neighborhood store, and mind you, I was in my 20s.
Right. A grown woman.
I was grown. I had a spouse. I had been in the military. I had come back. Wow. She looked at my child. She looked at me and said, "You just had that baby." I said, "Yeah, a few weeks ago, and I'm ready for the cutesy conversation." She said, "Hold on one second." She called my grandmother. She said, "Ma'am, she's in here with this baby."
Oh no.
She walked up here. She looked at me. She says, "You drive at least?" I said, "No, we walked over. I just live with you." She turns around. She looks at one of the. Chicago has this thing sometimes where there are what we call livery drivers, people who will give you a ride home from the grocery store to earn extra money because if you know that not every neighborhood gets cabs or Uber, so let's just let that go. And she looks at him. And he comes over. They have a conversation of about 3 seconds, as far as I can tell. And the next thing I know, me, my baby, and my groceries are in this car. And this man is giving me his number and telling me that I just need to call him and he'll go pick it up. And I'm calling my grandmother, I'm ready to. And first of all, the woman put the phone across the counter. I didn't want to take that phone across the counter. Right. Put it behind that car. I call my girl, like, "Do you know I'm grown?" "Do I care?" No. Right. No, you don't. So I'm going to sit my behind down with my ice cream.
And my baby, right?
And my baby. It's a lot, don't get me wrong. Right. On the other hand, that comes out of community norms where, as we know, Black women have a higher than average maternal mortality rate, not just in childbirth, but in the weeks after childbirth. And as far as my grandmother and my community was concerned, you have come this far. You are not about to mess it up now for you or this baby. You will pick your behind back in the house.
Get back in the house. And as they say, sat down, right? Sat down and sit
I will tell you this too. There was nothing a drill sergeant could say that could scare me.
right.
I had a Black grandmother who I once told I wanted to drop out of high school and get my GED.
Oh,
Don't do that.
don't do that. I love these stories of your grandmother, especially in the book. You open the book like kind of giving honor to her and saying she would not have considered, like she would not have called herself a feminist, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is so beautiful because you even talk about how, like, she had worked her whole life, her mama had worked, her grandmother had worked, and like, this very common story of, your grandfather saying, you stay home, right? And I'll earn the money. And her not even thinking, I love how you put it, like where you say that to her, work is work, right? Like this is not lesser work, or this does not mean that I'm not working, that I'm staying home and taking care of the kids and taking care of the home. I thought that was really beautiful. Because I think that I don't want to say we, but I think that culturally, like larger in society, that kind of like perspective is not always welcome, right? Like we kind of talk about like the women of the latter day, right? Like as like these docile kind of women who didn't have a choice, and it's like really, it's truly not true, So what, in your opinion, how did women like your grandmother and so many of our grandmothers who are similar to her impact the overall movement of Black feminism and or womanism? Oh, I think you're frozen. Uh-oh.
So 1 second. Okay. Are we good now?
Yeah, you're good
yes,
now.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to say it this way. My grandmother had a job when she was 13 or 14, right? So by the time her and my grandfather are having this conversation, she's worked for years. And she's looking at daughters who she wants to have the classes, the lessons, to do all the things. But what people sort of forget is that the women that we think of as, staying home really weren't staying home. They were at the school. They were taking their children to these places. And this is before the advent of a lot of babysitter and daycare and preschool culture. Right. So, because that's more of an 80s, 90s thing than it is, the 60s. And so she was looking at making sure her kids had every single thing they could possibly need. You needed help with homework? She was right there. Yeah. You needed to be transported to whether it was a doctor visit or a dance class. That was her. Yeah. Right? They could not have afforded a second person or third person to come in to do these things. But also, to be honest, I'm not sure that she would have trusted them in the same way. Because if you knew her, you would understand that to her, so many bad things could happen to Black children. Right? And you see that a lot with a certain category of folks who decide to give things up. They say, okay, well, wait a minute. If I don't do it, I have to trust someone outside to do it. Will that person outside do as much as I would do? And so because of her daughters were able, even though some didn't go to college, they finished high school, all of them, right? Let me just say, the concept of dropping out really wasn't actually plausible, despite what I said, right? I thought I had found a loophole in the word GED. I had not.
You had not.
I didn't know people could move that fast. She had just had a radical mastectomy and still
snatched you up so quick.
And so, when we're looking at that choice, sometimes we're not looking at people who are so much concerned about stepping out of the workforce. Now, Were there financial repercussions for her that she could not have predicted? Yes. Late in her life, but this is also down to what inflation has done.
Right.
The money that she had coming in every month was no longer enough. But it wasn't that she had nothing coming in, it was that the 8,000 plus a year she had coming in that would have been enough years before was no longer enough because she lived into the early 2000s.
Right.
But she had daughters, and she had my aunt who she lived with. She was fine, right? But that is a thing that I think people sometimes forget when we think of caregiving work as not really being work.
Right.
I struggled with math, and we're gonna put it that way. And I lived with her, right? So we were gonna get that math together at various points. But on the other hand, I love to read. You know, who made sure I had all of the mystery novels, all of the little magazines, all the trips to the library. My grandmother was the type that would get a friend of hers who owned a livery service to take me to the library.
Wow.
Right? Every week, whether my grandfather or her, I was at that library every week. Wow. I always had access to books. She made sure of that. My nickname was Books because, well, so many books. I have a book tattoo though, so like it's just, we're just gonna go with the theme. Right. But that was work too. Right. So when I'm talking about, you know, what she built for the future, she could have had a more comfortable retirement theoretically. I'm not sure how much of a difference that might have made, but she got to see her children and her grandchildren succeed.
Yes.
And we made sure she was good.
She was good. Yeah. Oh, that's so wonderful. I mean, like, so I guess a little bit, just a quick anecdote about me, because this night is about you, is that I am adopted by a Black woman who is actually, she'll be 80 in May. And so what you're talking about is so interesting to me because I see it reflected so much in the way that my mother raised me, because she was a single mom and she made the decision to, you know, like adopt me. I was a toddler when she got me. But as a result of making that decision, she made the very hard decision to let her career go. It was almost like instant. And it was the same kind of mentality that you were mentioning about your grandmother, about the trust, right? Like, first of all, here we are in, you know, like South Central LA, right? Like, I'm not gonna, like, this baby has already experienced a whole slew of things before she came to me. I'm not going to put her through anything else, and nobody can take care of my baby like I could take care of my baby, right? Was literally her thought and her, like, the way she lived her life. And so I think you're right. Like, there needs to be some acknowledgement that these women who reared us and who reared our mothers, right, worked. They worked. And it was, I think of myself as a child, I'm like, damn, my mom really had a whole lot of work, you know? And then she voluntarily put me in activities. Like, why would you even do that, you know?
Well, and that's the thing, because they made sure, right, over and over again, they make these choices. And you know, it's funny because my grandmother was really big on that same kind of thing, where you're going to have access to resources. Even if I didn't have them, I'm going to make sure you have activities. I'm going to make sure you do all of these things so that you know how to move in the world.
Right. Yes. It's amazing. And I think that your book does a really good job as well of talking about that impact and the legacy that people like your grandmother have set for us, you know, who come along now, and we have all of the access that they gave us, right? And we're able to, I want to say, like, organize it, you know, we're able to, like, channel it to something. Okay, so this is one of my favorite topics. I wrote notes, okay, because I was a little bit nervous, but One of my favorite topics. You talk a lot about like respectability politics and how it creates this unattainable pressure for marginalized people, especially Black women, to achieve acceptance of the white gaze, essentially, right? What are your thoughts on how the lie of respectability has impacted the white feminist movement?
So here's the thing, and I actually, this morning I was on the radio talking about Britney Spears and the ways that she was treated, because she was essentially painted as the wrong kind of white girl, right? She was supposed to be innocent and also sexually appealing. It's the early 2000s were a very bizarre time for young white women. Not just young white women, but there's like a weird bubble that happens in there with her and Lindsay Lohan and Miley Cyrus, and there's a lot of things I don't say about the interviews that were conducted, but we will shortcut it by saying that several people were very lucky they had those kinds of mamas and not people like my grandmother.
Right.
Okay. But the thing about respectability is that it's purity culture. Was a conversation we were having today, and I was pointing out that purity culture is just the other side of rape culture, right? So white feminism looks at respectability politics that they know are bad for them, and unfortunately sometimes they get as far as this is not just or correct for us, but then there's a breakdown because of misogynoir, or racism, flat out racism, where they think, but you should need to be more respectable. And we see this manifest in weird ways. Everything from like dress codes at work about hair, right?
Yes.
Why do you care how someone wears their hair?
Why?
Why would you even?
It's on
right?
my
Because
head.
it's right. Like it's never like hair must be kept out of the mangler machine. It's always about like, not having dreadlocks, not having braids. That's just racism. There's not a good reason for this. On the rare occasion, there is a reason, like the US military's various things. There's usually modifications that might need to be made about the width of the braid and the size of the bun. But if you can wear a helmet and go to war with this, you can do a lot of things with it, right? Your office will be okay.
Your office will be fine.
Right. And so when we see that kind of like professionalism looks like conforming to a random standard, sounding a random European-centric way, that kind of thing, we're not really looking at anything that has any basis in this is good for business, this is good for community, this is good for anything. We're just looking at a way to codify respectability into more things. And we'll see this sometimes too with Black churches of a certain type or Black teachers, where we'll see there was a weather person a few years ago. There was all of this commentary on her body, and whether or not her clothes fit correctly. And then there was something about a picture taken of a woman from behind in church and the fit of her skirt around that same time. And everybody was talking about how her skirt fit. And I was like, who's sitting at church taking pictures of women's behinds? I got stuff on that.
Let's talk about that.
Right? And so you'll see this sort of weird thread around respectability politics of body shaming, trying to police women and their sexuality. We saw this with Chloe of the Chloe and Haley group, right? Yeah. Where A, she's an adult, B, she's fully clothed and she's having fun. Right. And people who I know, because I am a Gen Xer, I was there when you were in your 20s. We were at the same bars. We went to the same parties. We had the same fake IDs. Right. Some of us was going to Freaknik. I've seen your photos. The audacity of people who were at Freaknik to be like, I can't believe she put that on the internet.
Yes.
I said, where you put what you put, when you put it, we would be having a whole other conversation.
Right.
So I think that white mainstream middle class feminism over polices in a different way the boundaries of what is considered appropriate whiteness, but it is the same thing essentially as respectability politics in any other vein. And it's as useless in every vein. It's not helpful. It's not healthy. Yeah. It's not even rooted in something logical, because the people who seem to do the most of it usually did the same things at the same age.
Right. Right. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's nothing left to be said about it, right? I just want people to hear that, you know, that like when we're talking about how these issues, like, yes, I think it's very important, right, that Black women, Black femmes, queer and trans Black folk and people of color and Indigenous people of color talk about these issues for ourselves. But then I also think it's really important for people to say, for like white folks, right, especially white feminists, to be able to look at these topics and say, wait a minute, the wool's kind of been pulled over our eyes too, right? If we're not like, you know, like the top 1% or whatever it is, like y'all been kind of lying to us too.
Well, and the thing is, even for the top 1%, when you get to the white women in the top 1%, they're under some of the same rules and expectations.
Right.
It's not like money frees you from the misogyny.
Yes. Yes. And you know, I won't get too into it because, you know, mixed crowd and all, but it's just like it's affecting all of us, right? Like it's affecting you and it's affecting me in different ways, right? But like I need for you to wake up and I need for you to see, because you know, if you're wanting a movement, this is, you have to realize that you can't always just be like, oh, those poor Black and brown folks, oh, those poor people in the hood, you know, like they're so oppressed. Because sis, the last time I checked, they was checking the length of your skirt too. You know, really and truly.
You are paying, your parents are supposed to be paying tens of thousands of dollars for that private school that says that you gotta stand here, you gotta kneel and put your fingers down so they can measure your skirt length.
Right. Right. Which I guess kind of brings me to this question. So in the past year, right, we've seen an influx in the online kind of calls to action, like, you know, listen to Black women, support Black women, you know, say her name, Black Lives Matter, right? Even though all of these movements were created obviously by Black and Indigenous people of color and women of color years ago, right? But we're seeing the influx of it coming again to mainstream and turning, you know, like other people are hashtagging now, right? So how can white feminists start to walk the talk? And how can they transform their activism from a hashtag to like tangible work?
So I call this being an accomplice. And I'm going to say, first of all, if you didn't plan it, you probably shouldn't expect to be at the forefront of it. If you just got to the table to have that conversation and join an existing conversation, this is not maybe your chance to be a leader. It is, however, your chance to do some real work. There's nothing wrong with not being a leader everywhere you go, because sometimes, I'll be honest, you don't know as much about another community's struggles as you think you do.
Yeah.
And one of the things is to use that power and privilege that you do have in service, right? So to turn to the person in that community who says, I'm going to use the hashtag trans crowdfund as an example, right? Sure, I could jump out here and I could start talking a lot about trans issues and so forth and so on, but I'm not trans.
Right.
So what can I do? I can put some money in the pot. I can pass opportunities along. I can speak up when people try to get me on board or get my community on board with hateful legislation. These are all things I can do. I can make my support clear, right? But I'm not going to be a leader in that struggle because that is not my struggle. And I have no business trying to come in and center my voice in that. Sometimes you are the one speaking. Sometimes you are the one building the platform or holding up the mic so someone else can be heard. And I think for a lot of white feminist voices in particular, there's an idea that they are bringing something by their mere presence to a movement, right? We have raised awareness. Awareness is good. Money is better. Action is better. Policy is better. And it's funny. If you want to repeat the things that people of color or other marginalized people are saying, instead of repeating them back to, each other in a way that gets you a check, sometimes you can repeat them to politicians. You can insist that politicians listen to those people. You can push for your neighbor, whether it's a PTA meeting or a school board meeting or whatever, right? Because there's all of these meetings that go on where decisions are being made that, if you think about it, this will help my community at the expense of another community. Or there are ways that I can get this politician, right? Because in America, I'm going to make somebody around me, I want to point this out. There are two things that's really easy to buy in America. One is a gun. The other is a politician. And yes, I know all of you can feel however you feel. It's okay. It's okay. I said what I said. I meant it. I'm from Illinois. I grew up in Chicago. We lock ours up. I think the rest of the country should consider joining us.
I love it. Yes.
we need to send some to jail right now. It's fine. And I say that because what tends to happen is that since they listen to money, and we know the wealth gap and the long legacy of Jim Crow and things means it's much harder for marginalized communities to buy their pet politician. If you really wanted to affect change and you have this money and all of these resources, it wouldn't just be you using the hashtag. It would be you throwing your money into campaigns. It would be you throwing money into where it can actually do some good. Bail funds, mutual aid funds, things of that nature. That's what people need. And it doesn't mean there's no space for volunteering, but that volunteering and the rest of it might look more like babysitting than taking carefully posed pictures.
Yes. Ooh, speak on it. Yes, I love it. You started a movement and fostered some really important conversations with hashtag Solidarity is for White Women. And you have a book similar, or a chapter similarly titled in the book. But yeah, how does that idea of solidarity miss the mark in creating inclusiveness for marginalized communities?
So here's the thing. Solidarity can't be a one-way street. You cannot say, and that doesn't mean transactional activism is necessary either, but you cannot say, I need support, I need support, I need support, and I give none. But by the same token, if you are someone who says, well, I've supported you, where are you? When are you going to support me? But then you don't have anything to support.
Right. Okay.
Right? You have to build the thing you want support with, whether it's the petition or the march, and it doesn't mean you can't use movements as a blueprint to help you figure out what would work for your movement. Right? The civil rights movement is essentially the blueprint for a lot of things in America.
Yeah.
But you're gonna have to be the one that takes that risk, that creates that march, that raises your voice and then says, hey, can somebody help me boost my signal? Right? Because otherwise it's not really solidarity if one person or one group is being expected to speak up on every issue.
Right.
And it's not really support or solidarity if when someone says, hey, can you help me? You say, well, that's not my issue. No, we all get free or none of us get free. Yes. But we all have to do the work. We all have to be willing to do some measure of work. And it doesn't mean we're all going to do the same work, right? Yeah. But I say this a lot because people, over the last couple of years have really said, well, Black Lives Matter should do insert list of things here. And hypervisibility is not power. And I'm going to have my little history moment because that's where my undergrad is in. But the way that we get to the moment we are now for Black liberation movements, that's hundreds of years of activism.
Ooh, yes.
Built on top of, right? So that's abolition and anti-lynching and the civil rights movement. Yes. And that's the Stonewall Rebellion and disability activism and all of these things, right? Stacked on top of each other, labor revolutions, all of these things over and over and over again. We're constantly climbing on the shoulders of our ancestors. We then look around and say, well, why aren't things done yet? Well, unfortunately, you can't undo in 200 years what it took 1,000 years to do.
Yeah.
Right. And we tend to think of it in terms of like American history, like America just popped up. But European history got us to this point, that colonialism and imperialism and genocide. And so it's going to take a lot to undo that. And every generation is going to have to put in the work and understand that they may not be the generation that gets the payoff.
Yes, I love that. And I also love what you're talking about, like all of these like the kind of overall march to liberation, right? Like the march to freedom encompasses all of these different issues. And in the book you say every issue is a feminist issue, right? And it's so funny because I echo that in the reproductive justice spaces I'm in, where I say like it's all reproductive justice, right? When we're talking about access to like competent public transportation, food equity, climate justice, it's all reproductive justice, it's all feminism, right? And so how can a person who wants to do the work, right, how can they avoid, I guess, I don't want to say burnout, because that's not exactly what I'm trying to pinpoint here, but how can they avoid feeling like they need to be at every meeting for every single topic and every, like part of the coalition, if you know what I mean?
Well, and this is the thing. None of us should be indispensable to anything. We should all, except our own lives, we should all understand that we do what we can the days that we can, but you are not even an effective activist if, whether it's actually reaching burnout or approaching burnout, right? Just like candles melt down quickly if you light them at both ends and then stick a wick in the middle, right? The same is true of activists. So you're not going to be able to go to everything. You're not going to be able to donate to everything or speak on everything. You're going to have to choose where to use your energy and do so wisely, and count on other people who are doing the same kind of work to pull their weight. And that part is hard. It's hard to think that other people will do the same work that we're doing. But that part is the important part, because if we don't trust other people to do that work and we think only we can do it, we're just creating a new system of problems, because sooner or later, that precarious house of cards falls down, right? And I know people will say, but what about the civil rights movement? And I'm going to point out that the person who chose the I Have a Dream speech to be given wasn't actually Martin Luther King Jr. Right? The person who organized those marches was Bayard Rustin. At every point in this, right? Coretta Scott King was doing all of this work. Rosa Parks came in doing work in a different place, right? So when you, the Community for Justice for Recy Taylor. So when you're looking at those things, you're looking at people who did the work that they could when they could, but they still went home. They still ate, slept, rested, passed the baton on to others, right? Because the people who fought to see Ruby Bridges be able to go to school, Ruby Bridges fights now. But Ruby Bridges has passed that baton on to some degree, because she's coming to a point in her life where that activism is something she can only do so much of, right? And that's not to say she's not doing work. It's just that she also has a life. She also has to survive. And I will also say this: survival in this system is activism in and of itself. Your activism doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be every day. It doesn't have to be seen all the time. Did you help your neighbor's kid with their times tables? That counts as activism too.
Yeah. I love that, because it's so funny because you just like expertly answered my next question, which was a selfish question about the strong Black woman trope. And, like in your book, you also talk about the fetishization of like fierce, right? And so my question was going to be like, as Black women and as Indigenous women and as queer women, like, do we get to just say, like, do we get to be feminists and say, like, no, today I'm not doing it, I'm tired? Like, do we get that?
Oh yes, I say no. I'm getting better about it. I didn't used to be as good at it, but I'm learning to say no to things that either do not serve me, do not interest me, or are not going to be good for me.
Yes. Beautiful. And I know we're running close to time, but so I just want to say thank you so much for allowing me to speak with you and for allowing me to relate with you on these levels, because it feels so good to have someone even in the virtual landscape to just be able to say, yes, snap, snap, snap. I know all of this and I feel all of this in my heart. So I appreciate you. I appreciate the knowledge you just have dropped on us tonight. And I think we'll open it up for questions and from the audience.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. I've got some questions from the audience, and thank you so much for your contribution to tonight's event. It really wouldn't have been the same without you, Ashley.
Thank you.
Don't go away yet. One of the first questions to drop in was, I think, a great one because it is particular to Salt Lake City. One of our viewers asked, what is your best advice to creating community when Black women are so spread out in Utah? I mean, we are less than 2% of the population here.
So one of the things I would suggest would be things like meetup groups, online groups. Virtual space lets you meet, kind of befriend, and then start to look at ways that you can gather in person post-pandemia. But start with the idea that whether it is a Facebook group, a hashtag, right? Pick whatever is working for you. You start to try to build community at a distance so that people feel safe coming together in the first place, right? Because one of the things about Utah in general and Salt Lake City in specific, and I'm gonna out myself here, a lot of people, even the people who may have moved there because of jobs or whatever, are not necessarily expecting to find other Black people there. And so if you don't know where to go in the first place to meet someone, you're probably not going to do that reach out. If you're the shy type, or you're the person who doesn't know how to orchestrate these things, or is not comfortable orchestrating these things. But there is always someone, and I'm looking at the Divine Nine in particular.
Uh-oh, Mikki, you froze up. I know you'll be back in a second because you were before.
You sorority girls know what I'm talking about. Yeah.
All right.
Yep, there we go. No worries. But I'm looking at like the Divine Nine, and you know, we all have that one friend who can organize anything.
Yeah.
Right. In like 6 seconds. Like you tell her a situation and it's like you joined the military, and I know I was in the military, and you don't know exactly how it happened, but that baby shower was planned and whatever was planned and everything's put together.
Yeah.
Maybe that needs to be a skill used to build some things.
Yes.
Excellent. I love that. I really love how you hone in on how activism pivots off of everyday life. Activism is how we live our lives every day, and extraordinarily too. So thank you for that. I do have a question from a pro-choice activist who read your book, and she wrote that you mentioned that pro-choice activists often use the language of eugenics in their arguments, whether this is intentional or not. And she asks how they can better articulate that necessity of a woman's right to choose.
So I think that one of the easiest things to do is to remove any talk of conditions that should be justification for that choice, right? We tend to say, oh, well, in cases of rape or of disability, or remove all of the conditions, right? We take the conversation about choice back to whether or not she is ready, willing, and able to care for and wants to care for this child. And we leave it there. We do not add on all of these stacks of reasons to justify needing a termination, right? Because when we do that, we open the door for people to say, well, okay, I guess because of X thing or Y thing. And then they start backpedaling and saying, well, if that child doesn't have, if that fetus isn't diagnosed with, then, right? Also, I'm going to say this as delicately as I can. if we are going to argue about whether or not disability should be a part of the conversation about choice, I would need your voices to show up for more than that conversation. It would need to show up for things like support for parents, right? My youngest is on the spectrum, and we have an IEP and the whole thing. And the most difficult part of having a child with some additional needs is not the kid, it's the system that basically exists to make this process as difficult as possible. And in our case, because of what I do and how my husband and I work, we are able to afford the lovely lawyer who used to spend a lot of time being CC'd on emails. It used to be a regular conversational moment, right? His IEP has been violated. He has just told me about it because sometimes it was the first day of school. And now we are sending an email to the attorney. But if you can't afford the attorney, then the IEP is going to get violated. If you can't afford any of the extra measures, those things may not be there. So if reproductive justice is going to have this conversation about what parents need, what mothers need, whatever, they need to also address what the children would need, right? Because otherwise we end up in this weird situation where we say, well, that's a reason someone doesn't deserve to exist. And then as we're seeing, eugenicists will springboard off the thinnest sliver of a possibility because, well, they're Nazis.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, thank you. I've got a question here. You talked some about that issue that you raised in your book about the difference between being white women being allies and really white women stepping up and doing more than that. And somebody asked, how do we separate that from, that old narrative that we can jump into too easily, that problematic white savior narrative? And, I ask that acknowledging that that's a question for us, white women, to ask ourselves, first of all, but.
Well, and I will say this, you're not going to save anybody. Just start there. Start from the idea that showing up when 3/4 of the work in the fight is happening, you are not the cavalry. You are just the next wave. And if you go into spaces with that thought process, you're less likely to overstep. But then you also have to be willing to ask yourself at every turn, is this necessary, right? Do I need to say it? And to ask sometimes, not in a condescending or judgmental way, have you tried? Because many of the times that the white saviorism conversation comes up, someone comes in and they're convinced a group hasn't tried X, Y, or Z, but they never bother to ask and they never bother to research, right? So you can say, hey, have you tried? And they say, yes, but city councilman so-and-so wouldn't listen to me. And you know that city councilman so-and-so's biggest donor is your Uncle George or whatever. And then you offer, you say, well, one of his biggest donors is my uncle. Could we maybe talk to him? Would you like me to talk to him? Because the people who are doing the work day in and day out and are going to live with the consequences of that activism should always be the people who decide what comes next.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to have to face the impact they are. And intent is really, it's not that intent doesn't matter, but intent is never more important than impact.
Yeah. And if I can really quickly, I just also love to add that 9 times out of 10, what you're thinking is some super fresh new idea, right, has been tried, and hence the reason why we're tired. We've written the letters, we voted like y'all told us to do, we've marched and picketed, and we've done all of these things, we've made the Google Docs, but it's just not working because, again, who are we, right? And what are we trying to accomplish? But so 9 times out of 10, think about that, right? Think about the fact that we've been in this fight for a long time. So we've had plenty of time to try probably the first thing that pops into your mind. I wonder if they've tried this.
Right. Well, Ashley and Mikki, thank you so much again for joining us tonight. It has been an absolute pleasure. And there are many hearts over in the YouTube box. And so I know that people have enjoyed it, and I know they'll continue to enjoy it. So thank you very much for joining us. And all of you out there in virtual land, thank you for joining us for this conversation tonight as well.
Yeah.
I hope we'll see everybody in the space again. And I'm looking forward to seeing Ashley in person. And Mikki, I'm looking forward to seeing your next project.
Yes.
Working on it now. So yeah.
All right. No pressure, but thank you again. Good night, everybody.
Good night.